Thank you. Yes, over here. Yes.
Boss, this is Chris Edley asking your question. Respectfully. There's one problem.
That means it won't be.
No. There's one problem, which is engineering the right kind of interventions, both public and private sector interventions, to do something about global poverty and similar challenges. But the other question is, the parallel challenge is building enough of a sense of connection between people who view themselves as different so that you can have a moral consensus to actually take action. So, and I know you share that view. So my question is, what are some of the most exciting or effective strategies that you've experienced that help build that sense of connection?
Well, I think that, let me just give you one example. I think that one of the most interesting ones is a little website called kiva.org, which allows individuals of very modest means to become directly involved in extending microcredit to people in Africa, Central Asia, Latin America, all kinds of developing countries, by actually selecting projects, contributing to them, knowing that a local non-governmental organization is managing this, getting reports on it, and then becoming ongoing with their involvement. Kiva has all kinds of business people who need credit all over the world. And after I talked about them and they were featured on Oprah Winfrey's show when my book came out, for the first time in their brief history, they had no more customers and they had more credit than they knew what to do with. So I think we've only scratched the surface of having people see that people in other countries with different skin colors and different perspectives and different faiths actually have a lot in common with them. Now, there are lots of other strategies that I think have to be pursued, but to go back to your point, if you really think about the source of most of the world's problems, they're rooted in the conviction that cooperation is not as important a value as conflict because our differences are more important than our common humanity. So my general answer to you is anything that brings people in positive contact with one another and reaffirms their common humanity is a good thing. I have long supported an organization called Seeds of Peace in the Middle East that began as a partnership between Palestinian Muslim kids and Jewish Israeli kids and some Arab Israeli kids, and now encompasses people throughout the Middle East. Now they're trying to do it in the Balkans, in Northern Ireland and other places. I think that we have to find a way for people to have consistent, constructive contact with each other when they're young to affect the way people think about their differences. I think that we have to find a way for people to appreciate what's unique about themselves without being drunk about it in their arrogance. That is, to think that, God ordained all of us with Ivy League educations like you and me to occupy the superior positions we do, or in a total other context that Allah really does want the Al-Qaeda to send all those young kids to an early death so they can immediately go to heaven and get a medal pinned on for killing a lot of other non-combatants. All of these things are basically heresies of arrogance, the idea that our differences matter more than what we have in common. In a way, that's also keeping us from making the right decisions on climate change. If we really believed that our common humanity was more important than our interesting differences, we could not live with ourselves if we ran any risk that was avoidable that our children and grandchildren wouldn't have the same or better life chances than we have. Almost every one of the world's problems requires a cooperative solution and requires people to give up the notion that their identity requires them to have somebody to look down on just because of the categories in which they find themselves. And I think we've got a big job to do in teaching and arguing about that, and also giving young people contradictory experiences. If you look at, it's not enough just to live together. I mean, look at what the big problem with the British, for example. At least in 9/11, Americans could say, oh, well, we were invaded. And the whole world, briefly, before we diverted to Iraq, was supporting the United States. Because, among other things, we had 200-plus Muslims killed, innocent Muslims killed in the United States. We had 230-something British citizens, people from all over the world, from 70 countries, by an invading force. Look what happened in Britain in the bus bombings and the subway bombings. You had British citizens affecting that. What happened? These people didn't think they belonged. Their whole reality was different from those with whom they worked. Their kids went to school, their kids played, they went to sporting events and movies together. They were not there. Look at the recent car bombings, which thank God failed in the UK, where you had 2 doctors who would have killed, had they succeeded, more people on one day than the number of lives they saved in their entire careers. That was a humongous identity crisis. And so I think that that's sort of the next, an old civil rights expert like you, we need to think about going beyond the notion of civil rights to civil community. You know, what the major debate in biology is today? This is interesting. When and Al and I, in our last year in the White House, there's an international consortium of scientists finally finished sequencing the human genome. And as a layperson, to me, the most important finding was that we were all genetically 99.9% the same. So that if you look around that room today, every difference you can see among people, including gender and race, is rooted in 0.1% of our genetic makeup. Now, Craig Venter, who was one of the competitors and who then became a cooperator with the International Consortium to sequence the genome, has done a lot of work since then, and he has come up with new findings that say that that's wrong, that we are in fact 99.5% the same, not 99.9%. This does have huge implications for scientific research, whether our differences are in 0.5% of our genetic makeup or 0.1%. But for politics, it is a stunning reaffirmation that it is nuts for us to go around killing each other and killing off our children's future and thinking that our differences are all that matter, since the whole range of them is somewhere between 0.1% and 0.5% of our biological makeup. And I think somehow we have to get that across. That has to infuse the way we teach our children about our religious faith, about their family and community obligations, about how they imagine themselves going up and having meaning in their lives.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, over here.
Good evening, Mr. President.